My name's Don Schwenning. I'm born in Toledo, Ohio. Spent the first 2 years of life or 3 or 4 years of life in Perrysburg. Moved to White House, Ohio for 2 years, and moved to Upper Sandusky in 1962, a long time ago. And so basically, Upper Sandusky is our home. I attended church with my mom and dad, and years ago, and something happened, and they decided not to go anymore. So basically, for several years, um, quite a few years, we weren't encouraged to go. And although I'm very familiar with lots of people in Trinity Church, but then we were, it was those were tough years, and as I look back, and but I always knew there was something missing, and so growing up in Upper Sandusky, from a childhood standpoint, it was. I mean, I had an enchanted childhood. We had the run of the town. As long as you didn't get in trouble and you were home by supper time, there was no problem usually. And I remember I have a good friend of mine, and today we're still good friends. And go over to his house, and he would, I'd say, "Hey, can Paul come out and play?" And it'd be almost dark, and his mom would say, "Well, he's in bed," and she'd look at me like, "You should be too." And I couldn't believe that, and it was hard to believe. But anyway, we joke about it today. But we had a really, I mean, it was fun growing up here. You could do things, and again, as long as you weren't breaking things or being damaging things or getting in trouble, my parents were fine with it. And again, they had to keep track of 6 kids,
Yeah.
and so I wasn't much trouble to them, but it had a good time, and loved playing basketball and school, and had a great experience with that, going through school, and especially in high school. And but there's always that in the back, that hole in your heart that's missing. And it wasn't until I remember I was going to I would attend church once in a while, but it was Tom Hoover, and I'll say who it was. Tom Hoover, when I was in junior high, that explained salvation to me. Just I sit here a minute, it gets tears in my eyes when I think about that.
That's awesome, Don.
And okay, anyway, and he explained it to me, and I thought, well, that makes sense. And it was the Holy Spirit's work, you know. But he explained that to me, and it made sense. And that's when by myself, on my own, I said, that's what I want. And didn't do much with it, but I knew what it was, and you know, um, but finished high school. After high school, thought I wanted to go to college. I did go to college for a year, played basketball, had a lot of fun doing basketball. Darn near flunked out of school. I wasn't a great student, and maybe because of a little lack of discipline, I don't know. But I always felt that I was right behind the curve on a lot of things, and I don't think people recognized that back then. But it was good. Um, Met Valerie, and we were married at 20 years old, and had people.
How'd you meet Valerie?
I met her at the fair, and it was my good friend Paul and I, and we met. We were at the fair one day, and one fair, probably in 1974 or 75, and I remember Paul looking at me and he says, "Hey, Donnie, that's Valerie Rawl." He said, "She's a nice girl. You ought to get to know her." I said, "So I always listened to Paul, so I did." Anyway, rest was history, and great, they had a great family, and of course, the Rawls all still go to church here, so at our church. So. And we've been married for 44 years, going on 45 this year in January, and we got married in the middle of winter people thought, why do you want to get married in the winter? I said, I don't care what the weather's like. He said, we're going to get married. And we did. And but it was after that that um, we just got married, and Tom and Janelle Needs came alongside of us, another great couple. And said to Valerie one time, she said, I'm starting up a Sunday school class, and I'd like you to come. And Valerie looked at one of them, I can't remember which, with Tom or Janelle, and she goes, and just as serious as she could be, says, what is Sunday school? Val was raised Catholic, and she said, didn't know what Sunday school was. But she, we found out, and they came alongside of us, and that made both of us grow. Valerie, back in the days of the Key 73, if some people could remember that, that's when she really accepted the Lord. But again, it was kind of, we weren't discipled, we weren't at that time, so we weren't growing. But as a couple, with with Tom and Janelle, you could never pay that back. What they took an interest in us, and they've done that with lots of people. We thank God for them. So, and they did that, and we were part of that Sunday school class that was went for years at the church, and with the Schindlers and the McKeevers and Tom and Janelle, and my gosh, I think Larry and Jane were in it, and too many others but we still get together once in a while. But anyway, we both grew in the Lord, and we had our first child, Megan, and she was I have to say she was a blizzard baby. You remember the blizzard of '78? You weren't around, but when the blizzard of '78, and we were staying home too much, and anyway, Megan came along. She was our first child, and then we had Jill, and then we had Tyler, and they were about 2 years apart, every one of them, and so. But going on, we were growing and active in Trinity Church back then at the old building, and going from there, I felt restless about a lot of things, and we weren't altogether happy with how things were at church, and I knew there was other things that we wanted to explore, and I wasn't one to let the grass grow under my feet, and so I told Valerie, I said, for a couple reasons. One of them, I wanted to live someplace else because I've always lived here, and just for just to try myself, test myself, and job wise also, because I felt that I wanted to work someplace else because that would test myself. And I did it. I was in the tool and die business, and I did an apprenticeship in tool and die work, and I finished that in 1980. Stayed another 4 years with the employer I had because they did train me, and I wanted to make sure I gave back to them what I could. And in '84, we moved to Arizona. It was I stop here now, but it was a good move, and it was hard, and we did. You could see God's hand in it for a lot of reasons, and I gotta stop now. They get emotional about that. I'm sorry. I didn't think I would. Anyway, we moved out to Arizona and to Tucson. When I went on ahead, and we went out and did a trip. I had Val had an uncle out there who peddled around my resume, and her uncle Paul, and he peddled to a place called Catalina Tool and Mold, and before I knew it, it was a I remember it was a March day. I think it was March, and we were having one of our big snowstorms. And a guy who was my boss, his name was Renato, still around, called me up. He owned the company, and he offered me a job right there on the phone. I said, "Well, wait a minute. I need to come out and see it." So we booked tickets, and we took our youngest son, who was in diapers still, with us out to Tucson. And I remember I accepted a job. I bought a house, and we moved back, and we came back here. Meanwhile, we had our house for sale out behind the fairgrounds that my dad and I had built, and um, we had told a real estate agent, Pat Barden at the time. She was selling a lot of homes back then. And when we got back, Pat had a contract on her kitchen table to buy our house, and the people who bought it, you can put this in or not, I don't, but the people who bought it was Deb and Bill Sturgeon, and you know them. They still live there.
Wow.
In where they live, that's where we.
Wow.
That's house my dad and I built.
Wow.
So we moved out to Arizona, and I would tell you after 6 months, if you'd have given me 2 cents, I would have moved back. I was so homesick. You know, I don't know if you've ever moved away, but what you do is you get through it, and you work through it. And then my wife got homesick after that. So all it took was one call to my mother-in-law, and she came out and stayed with her for a week or two, and we got through that. And so it was kind of like cutting cords a little bit in a good way. But we as a family, as a couple, we learned how to break into a community on our own with God's help. And, just it was a good exercise for us. I don't know how else to explain it. It was good for us to do that. And to this day, we have a family out there who aren't really our family, but they're good friends. And we still talk to them. In fact, we're going out in a couple of days, and we'll be seeing them. And so we have two kids that live out there still. They think they would die living through winter here. So that's the way they are. So anyway, so I worked at a company called Catalina Tool and Mold. It's a tool and die maker. I started out as on the floor working, and about a month in, my boss, who had a real was a he was a kind of a perfectionist, and he was an ex-Olympic gymnast on the Swiss Olympic team in '68. So he knew what hard work was, and he demanded it. But he paid me well, which left Valerie could stay home, and she could take care of the kids. So it really worked out good. And then one day there was three of the guys went into the office and came out, packed their tools, and went home. They were asked to leave. Their performance wasn't good enough. And next thing I know, I was called into the office, and I go, "Uh-oh." I couldn't imagine what it would have been. But anyway, he said, "Well, you saw what happened." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I want you to be in charge, and I'll help you." Anyway, that started a lot. And so the bottom line is I worked there for 24 years, and they were very good to me. I learned a lot of things about business. You couldn't learn that stuff in college. And how to run a business, how to get along with people, how to manage people. I don't have a piece of paper for it, but it was hard work, and it was rewarding work. I liked it. It was me. It was what I was good at, and so that made up for my failure for thinking I was a failure for in college, because I had to get over that, but I did. It was no problem after that. I learned that everybody's got their talents that are God given, and that was that. But meanwhile, we were in a very good church in Tucson called Christ Community Church. It was started in, I think, 1955. It's non-denominational. So there's people from Baptist backgrounds, Catholic backgrounds, Methodist backgrounds, all kinds of backgrounds. But it's a Bible preaching church that is still there today, and it's a great church. Probably twice the size of ours right now, and we learned a lot of things there and grew there. We blossomed there, and in fact, I found myself on the elder board the last 2 years I was there, and which is hard work, and it was really time consuming, especially with a time consuming job too. But we did it. Have a lot of good friends there still, and yeah, it was a growing experience. But what I forgot to say was before that, I think it was in '89. Um, we sent a group down to Honduras. Our church now sent a group to Honduras, and they asked us if we wanted to go with them, and we said yeah we would. And I think that was in '88 we went down with, and I know Larry Hoover's company at the time was very active there, and they still are, but it was at El Salvador. And so we went down with them and spent some time on one of the missions trips. And when I was down there for that year, they were starting a vocational school for mechanics and machine shop work. The equipment was already there, and they had a building. They needed a teacher for the first year, and I looked at it and I think God was like telling me, he said, "You're it." And I wasn't really wild about it, but but remember, we had already moved once. I'd already cut ties once. It was not hard to do. I think if I had still lived here, I don't think I'd have been so inclined to do that, if you know what I mean.
So God used that
I
experience.
think so. I mean, what else? I mean, but there's other aspects to it. But God knows what He's doing. So I just felt like we need to do this. And Christ Community Church is a mission oriented church. So there's quite a few missionaries that come out of Christ Community Church, and our church there, and it worked out really well because we were supported with just two entities. It was Larry Hoover's company and Christ Community Church were able to provide the support we needed for the year that we were down there. And we went down and worked at La Escuela El Salvador, learned Spanish in 2 months, and it was amazing. I couldn't learn it. I couldn't learn a hoot here, but there in 2 months I was ready to go because I was in a school for 2 months and 7 hours a day, 3 hours of homework every day, and it didn't take long. When you have to, you can, and it was good. Valerie was the same way, and then we had three of our kids at that time, and so we moved out to El Salvador, and I did the first year of machine shop with the kids, and got that going. It's since not there. It's not there anymore, but it went on for quite a few years. They had different teachers over the years, um, and I trust there was a lot of kids that got jobs. I know some of them did and did okay, but it's hard to know what someday we'll know what
Yeah.
if it was worthwhile. I mean, what the fruit was, I don't know. But it wasn't an easy year. There was problems, but it was a good year, and we look at with fond memories of doing that. So anyway, meanwhile, I told my boss. I said, "What?" I was there six. I think I was at Catalina for four. Well, it was '84. This was '89. 5 years. I said, "Hey, I'd like to take a year off and do this." And he wasn't a Christian by any stretch of the imagination. His values and the way he ran his business were very conservative, but he wasn't a Christian. And he said, "I suppose if you," he said, "I suppose if I told you no, you'd probably quit and do it anyway." I said, "Probably." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what." He said, "You can have a year." but you got to come back, or else I won't have a job for you. And so I did. And then when I got back, he said, now you have to be penalized somehow. He said, so what? I say, first year you lose a week vacation. I said, fair enough. So it cost me a week vacation just for 1 year. Cheap enough. And so he was really good about it. But I got jabbed about a lot, but they were fine with it. And so we had that. And anyway, worked there and with the church, and our kids got older and grew up, and um, the in I had been there about in 2007. I felt a little. We felt a little. That's Paperboy. A little restless about things, how things were. Business was it gotten harder. I'd gone about 8 years without any kind of raise because there was a lot of competition in that business from China at the time, and it got pretty tough. The last 8 years were really tough. And if you go 8 years without any kind of raise, that chips away at your earning power, and then you got to work harder to make ends meet. It was tough. And finally, my good friend Paul again, he says he'd always say, Donnie, when you moving back? I don't know. I don't have a job. And so one day he says, well, I got a job. And so we talked. And in '07 we moved back to Upper Sandusky. It was like a different chapter in your life, and I quit the tool and die business to go back into the feed business, and so many a time when I was the first year, and I was managing the new plant to the north of Upper here, I would I remember saying to myself, I left Tucson for this. I was second guessing myself, but it has worked out really well, and at this stage of our life, we do like being around here, and I really appreciate a small community, and since then have done things I never thought I would do. Been being involved with the Chamber of Commerce. We have a community group. At least hope we're going to get them started again, and we like to teach kids club, and both of us do kids club. And I love second graders. I love to teach second graders. I don't know what it is about those guys, but they're really cool, and we really enjoy that. So, and that's where we are today. And I took up flying again. So
we do have 4 children. They are Megan, Jill, Tyler, and Faith. And the interesting thing is that we had the first 3 children before we moved to Arizona. So we were done having kids. We moved to Arizona, set out on our new era of life. And then I still always had this feeling that I wanted more children, but I wasn't going to physically have them at that point. I felt so impressed about adoption. Well, we went to Honduras for 1 year, and during that time, I remember when we left, I looked at Don and I go, don't be surprised. You realize I want to adopt a child. I'm probably going to look into adoption when we're down there, and we're going to come back with a child from Honduras. Well, that did not happen, and I can remember thinking, man, why not? But it wasn't God's plan, obviously. So time goes on. A few years later, our friends are adopting a daughter from China. And while their paperwork all went through, we started the paperwork, we got scared, and we backed out. We just thought, nope, not for us after all. Well, anyways, time comes, they go to pick up their little girl in China. So they invited Megan, our oldest, who was 16, I think, at that time, to go with them and their other 2 children. So they go to China to be a nanny or something, help out. So Megan, she goes to China with our friends. They stop in Korea first for 3 weeks because the Chinese part was not finished like they thought. So while they're in Korea, They are visiting orphanages. It's what you do when you're adopting a child. So they drag our daughter to this Jacob's house. And while they're at Jacob's house, Megan is in there with the Hitt family and their children. And this little 3-year-old comes up to Megan, and she takes her by the hand and walks around with her. And Megan was so impressed, and she just really felt impressed that take a picture of us together. So they took a picture of Megan with this little girl, didn't know her name or anything. So they go back. Megan emails me that night. It's almost Christmas time also. She emails, she goes, Mom, Dad, our sister is over there. My little sister is here. Go get your fingerprints, start the process. We got to get her home. She's waiting. And I lost it. He's going to lose it here. I was like, no, they set us up all along. So we started the process. And I just felt, okay, this is probably the right thing to do. Well, it was God speaking to us also. So we started the process. They went on their trip. They ended up finally in China and got their little girl and brought her home. So then they're all excited, yay, our little girl, she's going to have her best friend, she's still in Korea waiting to be adopted. We started the process. And our kids at that point, we didn't have a name for her. We did get the child's name. She was finally identified. And so we were pursuing a special child. And all of our family agreed that her name is going to be Faith, because we were taking this huge step of faith to add to our family, and what's God going to do? Is he going to continue to open the doors or not? He did continue to open the doors. Faith had been abandoned, and she won't mind if I share this because she knows her whole story. And in Korea, at that point, an abandoned child was not allowed to be adopted, which seems silly because they need a home as much as anyone else, but there was no parental signature signing off on the child. So she would have just spent her whole time in Jacob's house, most likely, until she was about 16, and then they phase her into the society somehow. Well, anyways, unbeknownst to us at the moment, the Korean government put a new law into effect stating that abandoned children were able to be adopted, but if they had been in an orphanage for at least 1 year. Well, Faith had been in this orphanage for 1 year. So when we pursued that particular child, we were told, man, we've never done this before. We don't know how it's going to work. But we're game. We'll give it a shot. We'll see what happens. So we thought, okay. And we knew we didn't want any other children. Usually you're matched up with a child. And just in our hearts, it was like, if this doesn't work out, okay, well, we're like 40 years old at that point, and we're like, are we too old to do this? And people kept asking me, why do you want to do this? And I looked at them and I go, well, why shouldn't I? We're healthy. We have a good home. She's going to have siblings. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't. Are you sure about that? I'm going, yeah, we're very sure. So we kept going. The paperwork kept being processed. We were accepted, and then the law was working out, but they were having their struggles with it. So it kept on going. In the summertime, they said, now we're just waiting on more paperwork for Korea, and then we will let you know, and she'll be ready to travel, and you will come and pick her up. We chose to go pick her up in Korea and bring her back. So, well, I guess I'll say that Don's dad passed away the beginning of September of that year. So that was a blow to us. He never got to meet her. But so we all, our family of 5, flew back to Ohio for his dad's service. We flew back to Tucson, and the very next week, we got a phone call like on a Monday morning, I think it was a Monday morning, saying from our adoption agency, Faith is ready to travel. You can go over and pick her up. And I'm like, oh, what do we do next? They said, well, you need to go get your airline tickets, and you let us know when you're going to arrive. You'll be picked up, et cetera, et cetera. So we went to the airport, went out to Tucson Airport, got our tickets, and we had decided to take our second daughter, Jill, she was probably 15, with us. Tyler, the youngest, He didn't really care. Yeah, he's getting a sister. No big deal to him. He already had 2 sisters, so I don't know, maybe he would have liked a brother better, but we didn't ask him. So we took Jill with us, and we got our airline stuff reserved, and we flew over there. And boy, that day that the social worker took us to the orphanage to pick her up, oh my gosh, you're just, you're not going to be able to communicate with the child. She doesn't speak English, she speaks Korean. We might speak Spanish, she doesn't understand that either. So we're walking up there, and I can just remember, your heart's just pounding, and it was pretty terrifying, but so we picked her up, went back to the guest house, and had a couple days in Korea. He hated staying over there. He thought he was going to starve to death. He didn't like their food, but I thought it was fine. Anyways, so then we're all ready. There's the 4 of us, and we're ready to fly back to the U.S. And Don and I, his brother worked at Delta Airlines. He gave us buddy passes where we were on standby, but only Don and I were standby. So we're taking a big risk by flying, because Faith has her own ticket, a purchase ticket. Jill has a purchase ticket for the flights to get us home. We're standby. And it's like, well, if we don't get on those flights, we are toast, because you can't let a 15-year-old and a 3-year-old, you can't do that. Well, anyways, God opened that door up for us. We got on that flight kind of last minute, and we were able to get back home to Tucson and had a little greeting party and came home. But it was God worked everything out, all of the details. And we've seen that so many times in our life that, I don't know, it's really exciting, but that's a fun story, I guess you would say. It's just very special to us, how all the doors opened up. And at that age, finally, God he granted me the desire of my heart, another child. So that was pretty cool. But what we want, we love all of our children equal. Okay, so Faith has an unusual story, but each of them is so special also. Megan, Jill, Tyler, they're the 3 children that God gifted us with. So we don't underestimate that at all. And part of, I think, telling these stories, which our kids know, and they probably, oh, here Mom and Dad go again. He's a big storyteller. He starts on stories all the time, and I'm like, Don, I've heard that. Well, they haven't heard me tell it yet. I'm like, okay, yeah. But I found a verse just the other day when I was looking through. Psalm 77:11. I will remember the works of the Lord. So by telling these stories, we're remembering the works of the Lord, how special they are, how He loves each of us, and He cares so much for us, that this is the work that He's done in my life, in Don's life, and in our children's lives. And so that's what we want them to be able to go forward and know how special each of them is, that to the Lord, they're even more special and loved than we do, and our 7 grandchildren that we have thus far. There may be more in the future. And our prayer is that I do know each of our 4 children were baptized and accepted the Lord as a child. And I wrote down the dates they were baptized at our church in my Bible. So I have all of those dates for each one of them. And I just hope that they remember as they grow and raise their families, and who knows what God's going to do in their lives, that they will pass on to their children, our grandchildren, who we pray for then, that, that they are so loved, but that they need to accept the gift of eternal life from Jesus. That if they accept Him as their Savior, then, someday, we're getting older. I didn't used to think about these things very much, because it didn't seem that relevant. But it's dear to my heart now, because none of us knows the number of days we have. And it's so important. There's nothing else in your life that matters but that you come to the saving grace of God, and you become adopted by Him then also. And by being in His family, someday, then we'll all see each other again up in heaven.
It means that I know that He chose me. I know that He loves me. And I know that He wants me to obey. What does God want from us? He wants obedience. I don't always do that because I have a free will. But He wants obedience. Be patient with yourself, but put God first in everything. And I didn't always do that. I didn't always do that. And I paid the price for it. But, God's gracious. And I love the story about King David. There's a guy who's a murderer and an adulteress, but he was also, God says, he was a man after God's own heart. It's not that I'm going to go out and do adultery and murder anybody, but that's how loving our God is. If we put Him first, you know, and that speaks volumes. Yeah. Even in just in life, for me in general, working, you know, the 24 years that I worked at Catalina Tool, it wasn't easy, but and it was darn right hard a lot of times. There was times I'd go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. I always went to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get home till 30 hours later because your life, literally, your paycheck depended on it. And those were, but I wouldn't, at the time it was really hard, and my wife would go, do you live here? Things like that. But she understood. She understands now better, but that kind of thing teaches you patience and perseverance and the things that we need as people, because it's not, living is not easy. Doing anything, it's it's uh, it's tough, and God knows what each one of us needs. And I remember we were particularly hard time, and I was walking down the hall and at the shop after things were just not going good, and I had a shop rake in my back pocket, and I threw it in the ground. I said to myself, I had enough of this. Well, my boss was right behind me. But he was really good about it, and he understood. But is but those are the kind of things that you learn patience with, and that's why I say you don't want to sidestep the tough things. The tough things are probably usually the better things to do, the hard things, because you learn through them. And and that's how God teaches us. Look at the world as God would look through the world. In everything you do, you want to see the world. How would God look at this? And that's the eyes that I want to have.